Ma'am, put that back right now. I saw you take it. Officer Tyler Grant barked at a calm black woman in the middle of a retail store, completely unaware that the woman he was publicly accusing of shoplifting was his new police chief, about to turn his authority upside down in seconds. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The store was filled with the soft hum of everyday life. Shopping carts rolling across polished floors, quiet conversations drifting between aisles, the faint beeping of registers near the front. Bright fluorescent lights reflected off neatly arranged shelves, creating a clean, orderly atmosphere that felt predictable, routine, controlled. Danielle Harper moved through the space with quiet purpose, her steps measured, her posture upright, her presence calm, yet grounded in something deeper than the setting itself. She wore a simple blouse tucked into tailored slacks, her appearance understated but refined, the kind that did not demand attention, yet carried a quiet authority. In her hand, she held a small item, turning it slightly as she read the label, her focus precise, unhurried. There was nothing unusual about her behavior, nothing that stood out beyond the steady composure she carried with her. From across the store, Linda Brooks watched. Her gaze lingered too long, her posture stiffening as she narrowed her eyes slightly, interpreting normal movements through a lens of suspicion. She leaned toward a nearby employee, her voice low but urgent. "Keep an eye on her," she whispered, nodding subtly in Danielle's direction. The employee hesitated, glancing toward Danielle, clearly unsure, but said nothing. Linda did not wait. She turned, moving quickly toward the back office, her decision already made. Danielle continued browsing, unaware of the growing attention around her, or perhaps aware and choosing not to acknowledge it. Her eyes moved across the shelves, occasionally pausing, her expression unchanged, her movements consistent, deliberate. Moments later, the faint sound of a patrol car pulling up outside broke through the routine rhythm of the store. It was subtle at first, barely noticeable. Then came a shift, the slight pause in conversations, the turning of heads, the quiet awareness that something out of the ordinary had just entered the space. The door slid open, and two officers stepped inside. Officer Tyler Grant led, his posture already rigid, his expression set with the kind of confidence that did not come from understanding, but assumption. Officer Kevin Morales followed a step behind, his eyes scanning the store more carefully, his demeanor quieter, more observant. Grant did not hesitate. His gaze locked onto Danielle almost immediately, as if he had already been told exactly what to believe. He moved toward her with direct, assertive steps, his presence cutting through the calm environment like a sudden disruption. "Ma'am," he called out sharply, his voice louder than necessary, drawing immediate attention. Danielle turned slowly, her expression composed, her gaze steady as she met his. "Yes, officer," she replied, her tone even controlled. Grant closed the distance between them, his stance widening slightly, his authority fully on display. "We need to talk about what you just put in your hand," he said, his voice already carrying accusation rather than inquiry. Around them, the store grew quieter. Customers paused mid-step. Conversations faded. The ordinary had been replaced by something else entirely. And in that moment, as tension quietly began to rise, no one present realized just how quickly the balance of power was about to change. Grant's words lingered in the air, sharp and accusatory, as Danielle Harper held the small item loosely in her hand, her posture unchanged, her expression calm. For a brief moment, she simply looked at him, as though weighing not just the accusation, but the tone behind it. "This?" she asked, lifting the item slightly, her voice even unhurried. "I picked it up to read the label." Grant let out a short, dismissive scoff, shaking his head as if the explanation had already been rejected before it was spoken. "Yeah, that is what they all say," he replied, his voice loud enough to carry across the aisle. "Put it back." The command was not a request. It was delivered with finality, drawing more attention as nearby customers slowed, their eyes shifting toward the scene. Danielle did not immediately comply, not out of defiance, but precision. "Are you accusing me of shoplifting?" she asked, her tone calm, direct. The question landed differently than expected, forcing a momentary pause in Grant's momentum. "I am saying I saw you take something," he answered quickly, though his words lacked the clarity he intended. "And until I verify it, you are not leaving this aisle." Danielle held his gaze, unflinching. "Then verify it," she said simply. The response was measured, logical, and it unsettled the rhythm he had already established. Grant stepped closer, narrowing the space between them, his presence now more aggressive, more personal. "Do not tell me how to do my job," he snapped. Behind him, Officer Morales shifted slightly, his eyes moving between Danielle and the item in her hand, his hesitation growing more visible. "Tyler, maybe we should just—" he began quietly, but Grant cut him off with a sharp motion of his hand. "I have it handled," he said, his tone final. Danielle lowered the item slightly, her movements controlled, her composure unbroken. "Then handle it properly," she replied. The statement was not raised, but it carried weight, enough to draw a few murmurs from the growing crowd. Grant's jaw tightened. "All right," he said, his voice rising again, pushing past the resistance of logic. "Show me your bag." Danielle did not move immediately. She glanced briefly at her bag, then back at him. "On what basis?" she asked. The question was simple, but it exposed the absence of one. Grant exhaled sharply, clearly irritated. "On the basis that I am asking," he replied, his tone dismissive. "Do not make this harder than it needs to be." Danielle's expression remained unchanged, but there was a subtle shift now, something sharper beneath the calm. "You are escalating this without cause," she said. Grant stepped closer again, his voice dropping, more controlled, but no less aggressive. "No," he said, "I am preventing a problem." The justification hung in the air, thin and immediate. Morales looked at him again, his unease now unmistakable, but he said nothing. The crowd had grown quieter, more focused, the ordinary rhythm of the store replaced by the tension unfolding in real time. Danielle slowly placed the item back on the shelf, her movements deliberate, then returned her full attention to Grant. "There is no problem," she said calmly. Grant shook his head, almost amused, though the tension in his posture told a different story. "We will see about that," he replied. And with that, the line between routine interaction and something far more serious began to blur, not because of what had happened, but because of what he had already decided was true. The moment Grant said, "We will see about that," something in his posture shifted from suspicion to certainty, and that certainty began to harden. Into action, he stepped forward again, closer than necessary, his presence now fully intrusive, his authority no longer procedural but personal. "Turn around," he ordered abruptly, his voice cutting through the aisle with sharp finality. A quiet ripple moved through the onlookers. Danielle did not move immediately. She looked at him, her gaze steady, her expression unchanged. "For what reason?" she asked calmly. The question was precise, deliberate, and it forced a pause, brief but noticeable. Grant's jaw tightened. "Because I said so," he replied, his tone louder now, pushing past the gap in his own reasoning. "You are being detained while we sort this out." Danielle's posture remained upright, her hands relaxed at her sides. "Detained on what grounds?" she asked. The repetition was not defiance. It was clarity. Grant exhaled sharply, his patience visibly thinning. "Suspicion of theft," he snapped. "That is enough." Behind him, Morales shifted again, his voice lower now, more urgent. "Tyler, we have not confirmed anything," he said quietly. Grant did not turn. "I do not need confirmation to investigate," he replied, his tone rigid. Then, without warning, he reached forward, his hand closing around Danielle's wrist. The contact was firm, unnecessary, and it drew a visible reaction from the surrounding customers. A few stepped back. Others raised their phones higher. Danielle did not resist. She allowed the movement, her arm guided slightly behind her as Grant positioned her. "Hands behind your back," he ordered. The command echoed louder than it should have in the bright, orderly store. Danielle complied, slowly, deliberately, her movements controlled, her composure intact. The contrast between them had never been clearer. His urgency, her stillness. The metallic sound of handcuffs being pulled from his belt cut through the air, sharp and unmistakable. Morales took a small step forward, his hesitation now visible. "Tyler, this is not necessary," he said, his voice tight. Grant ignored him completely. The cuffs snapped closed with a distinct click, the sound reverberating through the aisle. Danielle's wrists were secured. The act was complete. Grant stepped back slightly, his chest rising as if the action itself had restored order. "There," he said, his voice firm, almost satisfied. "Now we can figure out what you took." Danielle turned her head slightly, her gaze moving across the small crowd, then returning forward. "You have just escalated a misunderstanding into a legal issue," she said quietly. Grant let out a short laugh, though it carried tension beneath it. "No," he replied. "I have handled the situation before it got worse." The justification came quickly, but it did not land the way he intended. The store had gone nearly silent now. Every movement slowed, every eye focused. Danielle stood there, composed, restrained, yet unmistakably in control of something far beyond the moment. And as the weight of what had just happened settled into the space, it became clear that the line between authority and overreach had not just been crossed. It had been sealed with a single, irreversible decision. The sharp click of the handcuffs still seemed to echo through the store as Officer Grant stepped back, his posture widening, his presence expanding as if the act itself had justified everything that came before it. The fluorescent lights above cast a harsh clarity over the scene. No shadows to hide behind, no ambiguity left in what had just occurred. Danielle Harper stood exactly where he had positioned her, her wrists secure behind her back, her posture upright, her composure unbroken. Around them, the silence deepened. Customers no longer pretended to browse. They watched. Phones remained raised. Every second was being captured. Grant adjusted his stance, glancing briefly toward Linda Brooks, who stood a few feet away, her earlier certainty now mixed with something less stable, something uncertain. "Is that the item?" Grant asked, gesturing loosely toward the shelf. Linda hesitated, her eyes flicking between Danielle and the product. I thought I saw her take it," she said, her voice no longer as firm as before. The lack of certainty hung in the air. Grant dismissed it immediately. "You saw enough," he replied, his tone cutting off any doubt before it could grow. He turned back to Danielle, stepping closer again, his presence pressing into her space. "Now," he said, his voice lower, more controlled, "we're going to go through your belongings." The statement was not a request. It was a continuation of control. Danielle turned her head slightly, her gaze steady, her voice calm. "You have no basis to search my property," she said. Grant smirked faintly, though the tension in his jaw betrayed something else beneath the surface. "I have enough," he replied. "You are detained. That is all I need." He reached toward her bag, his movements quick, assertive, already committed. Morales stepped forward again, his hesitation now unmistakable. "Tyler, we should at least confirm before he began, but Grant cut him off sharply. "I said I have it handled," he snapped. The interruption was louder this time, drawing even more attention. Danielle did not move as Grant opened her bag, his hands moving through it with unnecessary force, pulling items out one by one, placing them on a nearby display counter with exaggerated emphasis. A wallet, a notebook, keys. Each item revealed nothing. Each second stretched longer. The absence of evidence began to press against the narrative he had built. The crowd noticed. The murmurs grew quieter, more focused. Grant's movements became sharper, faster, as if speed could replace certainty. "Where is it?" he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Danielle's voice came again, calm, measured. "There is nothing to find," she said. Grant paused for a fraction of a second, then resumed, pushing past the moment. "We will see," he replied, though the words lacked the strength they carried before. Morales stood beside him now, no longer silent, his concern visible. "Tyler, this is not adding up," he said quietly. Grant did not respond immediately. He straightened slightly, looking down at the items laid out before him, then back at Danielle. For the first time, the certainty in his expression flickered, just briefly, but it was there. Danielle remained still, composed, her presence unchanged, her gaze steady. "You are continuing down a path you do not understand," she said quietly. The words settled into the space, heavier now, more deliberate. Grant let out a short laugh, though it came out thinner than before. "You keep saying things like that," he replied, forcing the tone. "But you're still in cuffs." Danielle did not react. She did not need to, because in that moment, as the evidence failed to appear and the crowd continued to watch, the foundation of his authority had already begun to crack, quietly, but unmistakably. Grant stood over the scattered contents of Danielle Harper's bag, his eyes scanning each item again as if repetition might produce a different outcome. The display counter was now cluttered with ordinary belongings, each one quietly contradicting the accusation he had built so aggressively. For a brief moment, the tension in his posture faltered. Then, just as quickly, he straightened, forcing control back into his stance. "You could have ditched it," he said, his voice sharper now, louder than necessary, as though volume could restore certainty. "That does not mean you did not take it." The logic was thin, but he pressed forward anyway. Around them, the crowd remained silent, the absence of evidence now as loud as any accusation. Morales shifted beside him, his expression tightening further. "Tyler, there is nothing here," he said quietly, his voice carrying more weight now. "We need to slow down." Grant did not look at him. "We are not slowing down," he replied immediately, his tone rigid. "We are finishing this." He turned back toward Danielle, stepping closer again, his presence more forceful now, almost defensive. "What did you do with it?" he demanded. Danielle met his gaze, her expression unchanged, her voice calm. "There is nothing missing," she said. The certainty in her tone did not rise, yet it carried more authority than anything he had said. Grant's jaw tightened again. "That is not your call to make," he snapped. "You do not get to decide what is missing." Danielle tilted her head slightly, her gaze steady. "No," she replied quietly. "But the facts do." The statement landed cleanly, exposing the gap he was trying to ignore. Grant exhaled sharply, his patience thinning further as the situation slipped beyond the control he had expected. "All right," he said, his voice tightening. "Then we're taking this further." He reached for his radio, his movements abrupt, pressing the button with more force than necessary. "Dispatch, I need to run this individual for suspected theft," he said, his voice controlled but strained. Morales glanced at him again, his hesitation now fully visible. "Tyler, we do not even have a name," he said. Grant paused for half a second, then looked back at Danielle. "You can give me that now," he said, his tone sharp, expectant. Danielle did not respond immediately. She simply held his gaze, her composure unbroken, her silence deliberate. The pause stretched longer than expected. Grant's grip on the radio tightened. "Name," he repeated, louder this time. Danielle's voice came calmly. "You have already made your decision without it," she said. The words settled heavily in the space. Grant let out a short, frustrated breath. "Then I will get it at the station," he replied, his tone hardening again, retreating into authority. He clipped the radio back onto his shoulder, then stepped slightly to the side, gesturing toward the front of the store. "We are done here," he said. "You are coming with us." The statement was final, dismissive, leaving no room for reconsideration. Danielle remained still for a brief moment, then began to move forward as directed, her steps measured despite the restraints, her posture unchanged. Around them, the crowd parted slightly, their attention fixed on the unfolding scene. The store, once ordinary, now held the quiet weight of something far more serious. And as Grant moved beside her, still clinging to the authority he believed he held, he failed to see the one thing that mattered most. That every step forward was not resolving the situation, but deepening it, carrying him further into a mistake he no longer had the ability to control. The automatic doors at the front of the store slid open with a soft mechanical hum as Officer Grant guided Danielle Harper forward, his hand hovering near her arm, ready to assert control at any moment. The shift from the bright, controlled interior of the store to the open space near the exit created a strange, suspended stillness, as if the moment itself had slowed just before crossing an invisible line. Customers lingered near the entrance, their attention fixed, their silence heavier now, no longer curious but expectant. Grant paused just short of the doorway, adjusting his grip on the situation rather than on her, his posture tightening as he reached again for his radio. "Dispatch, I'm transporting a suspect for processing," he said, his voice controlled, though something beneath it had begun to strain. He released the button, then turned slightly toward Danielle, his expression set, rigid. "Last chance," he added, almost as an afterthought. "If you have something to say it now." The words were not an offer. They were a formality. Danielle stood still, her hands secure behind her, her posture upright, her composure untouched by the weight of the moment. For a brief second, she said nothing. Then, slowly, she lifted her gaze to meet his. "Officer Grant," she said, her voice calm, measured, cutting cleanly through the tension. He did not interrupt this time. Not immediately. "You have conducted a search without cause," she continued. "You have detained me without probable justification, and you are now preparing to escalate this into a formal charge." Each point landed with deliberate precision, structured, undeniable. Grant's jaw tightened slightly, but he forced a short laugh, shaking his head. "You really think that it's going to change anything right now?" he replied, his tone dismissive, though thinner than before. Danielle held his gaze, unblinking. "I am telling you that once you proceed from this point," she said, her voice lowering slightly, "you will not be correcting a mistake. You will be documenting it." The words settled heavily in the air, carrying something deeper than a warning, something final. Morales shifted beside them, his unease now fully visible, his eyes flicking between Grant and Danielle as if urging something unspoken. Grant exhaled sharply, his confidence now forced, louder than necessary. "I'm not worried about documentation," he said, his voice rising again, reclaiming authority through volume. "I'm doing my job." Danielle's expression did not change. "No," she replied quietly. "You are making a record." The distinction lingered, precise and unavoidable. For a fraction of a second, Grant hesitated. It was subtle, almost invisible. Then it was gone. He shook his head again, stepping closer, dismissing the weight of her words entirely. "You can explain all of that at the station," he said, his tone final. "Right now, you're coming with me." Danielle remained still for a brief moment, her gaze steady, her presence grounded in something far beyond the situation in front of her. "Then you have made your decision," she said. Grant nodded once, sharp and certain. "I have," he replied. And with that, he turned toward the exit, guiding her forward, unaware that in choosing to continue, he had just stepped beyond the last opportunity to change the outcome, sealing a decision that would unfold far beyond the walls of that store. The automatic doors slid open fully now, and the late afternoon light spilled across the threshold, casting long shadows that stretched across the polished floor. Officer Grant stepped forward, guiding Danielle Harper just beyond the entrance, his hand hovering near her arm, his posture still rigid, still clinging to the authority he believed he held. The air outside felt different, quieter, heavier, as if something unseen had already begun to shift. Then, before he could take another step, a voice cut through the moment. "Officer Grant." It was not loud. It did not need to be. Yet it carried across the space with unmistakable authority. Grant stopped. Slowly, he turned. Standing just a few feet away was Deputy Chief Allen Reeves. His presence composed, his gaze sharp and fixed. Two additional officers stood behind him, their posture disciplined, their attention locked on the scene in front of them. Morales reacted first, his shoulders straightening instinctively, recognition immediate. "Sir," he said quietly, stepping back. Grant blinked, his body stiffening, his grip loosening slightly. "Deputy Chief," "We have a suspect," he began, but Reeves raised a hand, stopping him without effort. His eyes moved past Grant and settled directly on Danielle. For a brief moment, the silence that followed felt heavier than anything that had come before it. "Ma'am," Reeves said, his tone respectful, controlled. "Are you all right?" Danielle turned her head slightly. Meeting his gaze, her expression calm, her voice even. "I am." The exchange was brief, but it shifted everything. Grant felt it immediately. The ground beneath his certainty began to give way. "What is this?" he asked, his voice no longer sharp, no longer commanding, but uncertain, searching. Danielle straightened slightly, despite the restraints, her posture aligning with something unmistakable. Then, without raising her voice, without changing her tone, she said, "I'm your new police chief." The words did not echo. They did not need to. They landed with finality. Grant froze. Completely. The world around him seemed to narrow to that single sentence, replaying in his mind as his understanding struggled to catch up. "No, that is not," he started, but the words fell apart before they could form. Reeves stepped forward now, his expression tightening as he turned to Grant. "Remove the cuffs," he said. The command was immediate, absolute. Grant did not move at first. His hands hovered, uncertain, his breath uneven. The reality of what he had just done pressed down on him all at once. The accusation, the search, the restraint, the public spectacle. Morales stepped closer, his voice low but firm. "Tyler, do it." That broke the moment. Grant's hands moved quickly now, fumbling slightly as he reached for the cuffs, the metallic mechanism slipping under his fingers before finally releasing with a sharp, unmistakable click. Danielle lowered her arms calmly, adjusting her sleeve with a smooth, deliberate motion, her composure untouched. Reeves turned back to Grant, his gaze steady, unyielding. "You detained the police chief," he said quietly. The statement was not loud, but it carried more weight than anything else in the room. Grant's shoulders dropped, his posture collapsing under the realization. The authority he had relied on was gone. Not challenged, removed, and standing in front of him, exactly where she had been from the beginning, Danielle Harper remained calm, composed, and completely beyond his reach, as the full consequence of his actions settled in with a finality he could no longer escape. The sharp click of the handcuffs releasing seemed to echo louder than when they had first been locked. The sound marking not just the end of restraint, but the collapse of everything Officer Tyler Grant had built his authority on just moments earlier. His hands dropped slightly as he stepped back, his posture no longer rigid, no longer commanding, but uncertain, exposed. The shift was immediate and irreversible. Deputy Chief Alan Reeves did not raise his voice, yet his presence filled the space with a different kind of control, one rooted not in force, but in clarity. "Officer Grant," he said, his tone calm but firm, "do you understand what just occurred here?" Grant opened his mouth, but no words came out. His eyes moved between Reeves and Danielle Harper, his breathing shallow, uneven, as the reality continued to settle in. I did not know," he finally managed, the words barely holding together. Danielle adjusted her sleeve with a smooth, deliberate motion, her composure fully intact, her presence now unmistakably authoritative. "You did not need to know," she said quietly. "You needed to verify." The distinction landed heavily, stripping away any remaining defense. Reeves stepped closer, his gaze steady, unyielding. "You conducted a search without cause," he stated. "You detained without probable justification. And you did so in a public setting." Each point was delivered with precision, dismantling Grant's position piece by piece. Around them, the store remained silent, every witness now fully aware of the reversal unfolding before them. Grant's shoulders lowered further, the weight of his actions pressing down in a way no uniform could support. "Badge," Reeves said. One word. Final. Grant hesitated for a fraction of a second, his hand hovering near his chest, as if the act itself had not fully registered. Then, slowly, he reached up, unclipping the badge that had defined his authority. He held it briefly, his fingers tightening around it, before placing it into Reeves's outstretched hand. The soft transfer carried a gravity that resonated through the room. Morales stood nearby, silent, his earlier hesitation now transformed into quiet understanding. The line he had sensed had been crossed was now fully visible. Reeves turned slightly, addressing another officer. "He is relieved of duty, effective immediately," he said. The words settled with quiet finality. Grant's gaze dropped, his posture collapsing further, his voice gone completely. The same public space where he had asserted control now held him in quiet accountability. Danielle remained where she stood, calm, composed, her authority never raised, only revealed. She did not step forward. She did not press the moment. She simply allowed it to unfold. And as the reality of consequence replaced the illusion of control, the balance that had been disrupted was restored, not through force, but through the undeniable weight of truth. As Officer Grant stood motionless, his badge no longer his, the atmosphere inside the store began to shift, slowly at first, like a tension unwinding after being held too tightly for too long. The silence that followed was no longer heavy with conflict, but softened into something quieter, more reflective. Deputy Chief Alan Reeves stepped back slightly, no longer at the center of command, but allowing the moment to settle into its natural resolution. Danielle Harper remained where she stood, her posture steady, her presence calm, as if nothing about her had changed, because in truth it had not. Around her, the customers who had once watched in stunned silence began to lower their phones, their expressions no longer tense, but thoughtful, carrying the weight of what they had just witnessed. Linda Brooks stood near the aisle, her earlier certainty completely gone, replaced by quiet discomfort as she avoided meeting Danielle's gaze. Morales shifted slightly, his posture straighter now, his respect unmistakable even without words. Danielle turned, her movements smooth and unhurried, and walked back toward the display where her belongings still rested. Each step was measured, composed, restoring the rhythm that had been interrupted. She gathered her items one by one, placing them neatly back in her bag, her actions deliberate, controlled, as though reclaiming not just her property, but the order of the moment itself. No one spoke. No one needed to. The space had changed. The noise of authority had been replaced by the quiet presence of it. As Danielle closed her bag, she paused briefly, her gaze lifting just enough to take in the store, the aisles, the people, the subtle return of normalcy. Then she turned and walked toward the exit. This time, no one stopped her. No one questioned her. Instead, there was a subtle shift as people moved aside, creating a path without being asked, their gestures quiet but unmistakably respectful. The automatic doors opened once more, and she stepped through, the late afternoon light meeting her with the same calm it had held before everything began. Behind her, the store slowly returned to its ordinary rhythm, the soft hum of movement, the quiet conversations resuming, the sense of routine settling back into place. But something remained, something unspoken yet deeply felt, a recognition that authority, when real, does not need to be proven, only revealed. And as Danielle Harper walked away with steady, composed steps, the moment closed not with noise, but with clarity, leaving behind a quiet understanding that would linger long after she was gone. What makes this story resonate is not simply the reversal of power, but the quiet exposure of how fragile assumed authority can be. Officer Grant believed that control came from acting first and questioning later, that certainty could replace process. But what unraveled him was not resistance, it was patience. Danielle Harper never interrupted his decisions. She allowed them to fully form, knowing that each unchecked step carried consequences beyond the moment. What we witnessed was not a clash of strength, but a contrast between impulse and discipline. Authority, when rooted in ego, becomes brittle. It depends on being unchallenged, unquestioned, and immediate. But authority grounded in structure does not need to rush, because it holds its weight over time. Grant did not lose power because someone took it from him. He lost it because he misused it in plain view, turning his own actions into evidence against himself. And that is the deeper truth here, that the most decisive form of justice often comes not from confrontation, but from allowing truth to reveal itself completely. I hope you enjoyed that story. Please share it with your friends and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. In the meantime, I have handpicked 2 stories for you that I think you will enjoy. Have a great day.